We interrupt this program for a special news bulletin.
Throws toward the corner of the end zone. It is intercepted! Intercepted! The Ducks have the ball!
To the end zone! Oregon! Mariota dives! Touchdown! They hand it off straight out! C.J. Verdell wins the game for Oregon!
Inside the 10! A hat-trick, a touchdown from Justin Herbert! Howard's going to run for it. Time runs out, and that'll do it! Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon! They storm the field at Autzen!
Welcome, Duck fans, to another episode of the Ducks Rising Alumni Corner on the Ducks Rising Podcast Network. I'm Travis Rooke-Ley, grateful to be joined by not only my co-host Zachary Neel, but we have the honor of welcoming one of the best wide receivers in Oregon history, Keenan Howry, with us today. Keenan, thanks for joining us.
Oh man, thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We obviously have, a ton to talk about with this year's team. I know you're making the trip to Eugene this weekend, but I want to start by going back a little bit. Can you share a little bit of your backstory with your recruitment to Oregon and how you kind of ended up in Eugene in the first place?
Yeah, coming out of high school, I was recruited a little bit, not probably as much as some of the other guys here in Southern California, but was getting recruited by Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State, and a couple other schools, but it really came down to those three, Oregon, Oregon State, and Washington State at the end. I had a teammate at Oregon, Tony Hartley, who was 3 years older than me. We both went to the same high school. I was really good friends with his brother. So when, he went to, Oregon and I followed them, so I'd always kind of followed up on Oregon just because, he was there and just kind of watched as much as I could. And when, they started recruiting me after my junior season, I kind of fell in line and like, okay, cool, this might be a nice school to go to. Tony goes there, so it must not be that bad. But when it came down to it, man, it was really close. I think the thing that really kind of pushed me towards Oregon was the head coach at Oregon State, Mike Riley, got the head coaching job at the Chargers right at the end of the season. So I'm talking about I'm a week out from going on my official trip to Oregon State. He gets the head coaching job, so I cancel that visit, right? So he's gone. At the time they didn't even know who the coach was going to be, so I just kind of canceled them off my list. And then move forward, I went on my visit to Washington State. Everything was perfect. They kind of rolled out the red carpet for me. They were probably number one on my list at the time. I got there, talked to the offensive coordinator, talked to Coach Price, and he was just, giving me the world, right? Telling me everything. And then we sat down, we're going over everything, and he's just like, yeah, I want you to come in here your freshman year, and you're probably going to redshirt, and, we're going to try to put some weight on you and this, that, and the other. And, I just kind of, not really rolled my eyes, but just kind of in my head, just thinking like, oh man, I want to at least, be able to compete, my freshman year. You guys weren't that great this year because, they were coming off the 97 Rose Bowl year and they pretty much lost all the receivers. So I knew going into it, they didn't have any receivers coming into like my next year. So that kind of turned me off a little bit. I still kept them on, I was like a short, my short list, and it was between them and Oregon. So then I went on my trip to Oregon. I was already kind of, like I said, with the teammate connection with Tony Hartley. I was always, really into him. And then going up there, being one of the first, I think, recruiting classes or recruits at all to be able to ride on the Nike plane at the time. It was myself, Ontario, Kevin Mitchell, a couple other guys that were all on the same trip. We all got to fly on the plane. And it was, they rolled out the red carpet for us. I was already, a big fan of Coach Peterson, Chris Peterson, who was my receiver coach, and then Coach Osborne, who was the coach who was recruiting me. And then, just got to Eugene and just, fell in love with it, loved the tight-knit community, and just, I walked out of there and I was like, yeah, I think this is where I want to go. And, kind of the rest is history.
It's crazy just to contrast that with now. Like, you could have made the argument at that time Oregon was the worst program or had the least success of those three schools that you mentioned. And just thinking about where things are today, it's such a crazy difference to compare that time to now.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, coming off of it, 90s. So this is 1998, the end of 98 and 97, Washington State had just, like I said, played for the Rose Bowl. They won the Pac-10. They were, Ryan Leaf, that whole era. They had just, went to the Rose Bowl, lost to Michigan. They were riding high. Oregon State had just beat Oregon in the Civil War that year in 98. Oregon was, kind of had a not so fun hula bowl or Hawaii Bowl, hula bowl, whatever it used to be called back then. Lost to Colorado. Yeah, it was, it was, when you think about it back then, Oregon was kind of the team that was kind of stuck in the middle. You take out the 94 Rose Bowl team and you look back and you go, Oregon was always, third, fourth, fifth in some years. They get to the top of the mountain in '94, but then they were always just kind of slide back down there. Whereas, like I said, Washington State had just played for a Rose Bowl. Oregon State with Riley was kind of on the up and coming, and then so then there was Oregon. But yeah, it worked out. It was good good for me to pick the Ducks.
You mentioned one of the reasons that Washington State kind of fell by the wayside with you is they wanted you to redshirt and you wanted to play right away. You had an impact as a freshman with Oregon. What was that adjustment like, and what kind of allowed you to get on the field so early on?
And I mean, it wasn't so much that I wanted to play right away. It's just I wanted the opportunity to come in and play. I didn't. It's one thing to come in and be kind of really arrogant or cocky or just like really confident in my abilities and coming in saying, yes, I want to come in and I want to play as a freshman. And I wasn't delusional about my skills. I just wanted to know that I was coming in, having an opportunity to come in and play. And I just felt like I was like, kind of, I just had to wait. And I was already kind of getting pushed, into this spot. And then with Oregon, Coach Peterson was like, hey, man, you come in here, really, he's like, Tony Hartley's the only one coming back. Everything's up for grabs. So the one thing I think really helped me was having a good relationship with Coach Peterson. And then I came up during my spring break, you know, and just sat in on meetings, went to practices for the whole week, and then as soon as my senior year was done and I graduated and I was able to come up and I got up here I think at the end of June, it was I think a week or so after I graduated and was same thing, lifting weights with the team, running with the team, doing 7-on-7 afterwards, and really work talking with Coach Peterson almost all the time about what the plays, these are the plays, and then getting involved in the playbook pretty early is what I really think really helped me once I got to Oregon, because the first game I was playing one position, and then coming into the first game of the season against Michigan State, I ended up being the third receiver in three receiver sets, and then going into the Reno game, which the first game I ever started. I remember we were going to that meeting and we're just getting ready for the game, and Coach Peterson like held me after. He's like, "Hey, Keenan, hold up a minute, I want to talk to you." So I'm thinking like, because the first game I didn't have any catches. Second game against UTEP, I had a catch and I played a lot. I was rotating in and out, and I was thinking, I was sitting there, I was like, "Oh man, I'm about to have the red shirt talk." Like he's about to come in and say, we're probably gonna best to red shirt you and just kind of see how it goes. And he sits in there and he's like, "Hey, I want you to start learning how to play, learning all the X receiver stuff, because you're gonna start at X this week." And I was just like, "Oh, okay, let's go." And I was just kind of, and it was kind of our wrap from there. And then, it's started ever since, and it was a fun ride.
So obviously, like, had a ton of success throughout your whole career. Just looking through your stats and like kind of produced, every year that you were at Oregon. But I know for a lot of Oregon fans, like that 2001 season still stands out in a lot of ways for us. And I know for Zach and myself, growing up in Eugene, those were like some of our formative memories of becoming a fan. So like, what still stands out to you about that year, or what still is like top of your mind when you think about like that special season?
I think what stands out the most, I mean, you can always, talk about the games and, everything that kind of went into the season, and, the game against, Washington State, the game against UCLA, the Oregon State game. But my thing is always is leading up to it. It had a different vibe that whole summer. It just, the year before, like we knew we were going to be pretty good coming off of my freshman year. Had a lot of people coming back, but there were still some questions. Can Joey kind of be the man as a full-time starter for all the whole season, not just halfway? And so then coming into 2001, it felt different. Everybody was kind of locked in. We all just kind of kind of knew, what was going to come of the season. I don't think any of us had anything left in winning the Pac-10 that year on our list, and we were trying to play for a national championship. That was our goal. We thought that was going to be, where we were going to be at the end of the year. I mean, it's debatable. We probably should have, but yeah, that was my biggest remembrance from that year, was just going into that summer, just the vibe on the team and how it just felt. It just felt different than all the other 3-4 years I was there, and you know, and the results kind of speak for themselves.
You talk about having those kind of, I think they'd be considered lofty expectations at the time, considering what Oregon had accomplished so far. But compare those to now, the expectations this team has going into every year. Like it kind of is that championship level expectations. How much pride do you take in the fact that you were a part of one of those first teams that even started to think that way after what you guys accomplished in 2001?
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, like I said, when we come into that 2001 season, we had that feeling. I always joke around with a lot of people, and I tell people, like, man, I didn't realize that we were ranked fifth in the nation my sophomore year before we lost to Oregon State. And I was just like, man, I just, that's how, just locked into everything, we were. We just came out there every week and we're, trying to get wins. And then I was like, so then you put that into perspective, where we started in 2001, and, that was the goal. Like we had a huge letdown the year before, losing to Oregon State, even though we came out against Texas and played really well and got the win. We just, there was a sense of unfinished business, and we went out there that next year knowing that, hey, we're going to put everything into it. And I mean, I think that was our look every single year. And I mean, I think that's part of the reason why I came back my senior year, was I still had that feeling that, hey, that championship is obtainable. We're right there. We're on the doorstep. We're, a couple plays against Stanford, a block punt, and, we're right there. And I think that's one of the beautiful things of where, Coach Lanning and, that staff has done with the program, is just like keeping the expectations high, having the standards what they are, and being able to come in, week out, reset. Last week is done, flush it, move on to the next. But the expectations kind of stay where they are, because I mean, I think that's where, if Oregon wants to compete at those levels, they're recruiting that way, then they have to be able to come out there every single Saturday and play to that high level as well. So it's awesome to see, man. It's good to see the program is where it is, and I'm kind of glad it's kind of soared like the way it is.
So just to kind of put a bow on that 2001 season, I know many say that Miami team was like probably the greatest semblance of talent of all time, and there was some controversy at the end of that year, between y'all and Colorado and Nebraska. Like, did you guys want them bad? Like, what were your conversations around that squad that was looming?
Oh yeah, I mean, going into the conference championship game, so our Oregon State game, they moved the game to December 1st that year to match all the conference championship games, because they felt like us and Oregon State were going to be the two best teams in the Pac-10 at that time. And I mean, we held up our end of the bargain. Oregon State not so much that year, but we thought, when Florida beat Tennessee, when Texas lost, we thought we were gonna slide into the two spot, just by way of us winning and everybody else losing. So it was disappointing to kind of see the results that Sunday, where we were, we ended up fourth. Nebraska jumped us, Colorado jumped us. So it was, it was kind of, gut wrenching. But, I played, and when I was with the Vikings in Minnesota, I played with Bryant McKinney, who's, he was a left tackle for Miami for the Hurricanes at that time. And we would get into it all the time about, oh, you guys couldn't have hung with us. You guys would have, you see what we did to everybody else. And I'm like, yeah, but you guys struggled against Boston College and Virginia Tech. Like, yeah, you guys could have got up for Nebraska, but, it would have been different. And, everybody always, talks about how much talent that Miami team had, but those guys didn't play that much. They could talk about, oh, they had McGahee and Frank Gore. I was like, yeah, but they didn't. Portis got all the carries. And it's like, oh, defensively they had Sean Taylor. I was like, yeah, those guys were freshmen and they didn't play. It's like their secondary was good, but I still don't think anybody in the nation that year could have handled all three of us at receiver that year. We were, I thought we were the best, group of receivers in the nation, and I think it would have been hard for even Miami to kind of deal with all three of us.
That's funny. I've talked to Joey several times about that in particular. I
Yeah.
know that that's the one thing I can bring up to get him fired up and angry. It's just like that sticks with him so much. I'm sure it sticks with all you guys on that team. I'm curious,
Yeah.
you guys. I mean, you obviously played in the Pac-10. You've got a lot of, you know what the regional rivalries meant and the games that meant to a lot to people on the West Coast. How bittersweet was it, a couple years ago when the conference basically dissolved and, Oregon went to the Big Ten. You had teams go to the Big 12. You had a couple teams stay in the Pac-12 or the Pac-2, whatever you want to call it. What was that experience like for you, knowing that it was probably good for the health of the program going forward, but you kind of lost that going backwards?
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, college football is business, and I think the powers that be have kind of taken that mantra and run with it probably the last 15 years, where, the argument used to always be, oh, we can't have a playoff because these guys have school, they can't play more than 11 games, it's what about the academics, it's we can't expand, it's all about school, it's always been about academics. And then, 20 years ago, it was like, well, now this money is rolling in. This is kind of nice. Let's go to 12. Let's expand. And, it is bittersweet because you love for me being a West Coast kid, it was like being able to, be able to come home at least once a year and play against SC or UCLA was always huge, I know for most of the kids who were in the Pacific Northwest, that was their big game was always, hey, playing Washington, playing Oregon State, and now it's I mean, it's great for the program, it's great for Oregon because I mean we have to do what we have to do to kind of keep our, lofty expectations right where they were. The Pac-12 and the powers that be didn't keep that same energy, and we had to make moves as things kind of started falling apart. So it's bittersweet that the conference is kind of fallen apart and you've lost those regional games. I mean that it's not just for the Pac-10. I mean it's for the Big 12. It's for the ACC, the SEC. I mean you're as expansion and as the game grows. I mean we're kind of getting to a point where you kind of lose all that. And that was always one of the beautiful things of college football was the regional rivalries. So I mean yeah, it's a like you said, it's bittersweet, but I mean, for the game to grow and for Oregon to be where they needed to be, we couldn't wait on the rest of the Pac-12 to kind of catch up to where we were trying to go, and joining the Big Ten was probably the best place for us.
I know you mentioned there like the financial and school pieces of it, and for someone who is obviously still involved with coaching athletes at the high school level, I'm curious, like, how different is the recruiting process now from what you went through to like the athletes you see now going through that process?
Well, it's completely different now just because of the portal. I mean, it's you unless you're one of the top of the top. I mean, even the smaller schools don't really recruit kids anymore. Whereas like we would see, a bunch of, some of the, the Mountain West schools, the lower end Pac-10 schools would just kind of always come around the schools and be recruiting kids. Like they don't really come around that often anymore. I think most of their time now is kind of geared toward, using the portal as, filling their roster out. And then once that's done, I think then they kind of recruit the high school level. And that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, I think it's better for a lot of kids because I think for some kids they don't get, you know, I think a lot of kids in previous years would get held up or kind of like, turn their nose up at, having to go, play at a Mountain West school or having to go and play at, one double A school or, something like that. Toward now, I think is kind of your only option for a lot of kids because, the top tier power forward, I mean, the top tier programs, they're recruiting the top 100. That's pretty much it. Everything else is the portal, and then that next tier down, they're kind of recruiting the top tier programs and trying to figure out who's leaving from those programs that they can recruit. And then they're recruiting, the lower tiered programs saying, oh, who do these teams have that are really good that we can actually bring up and elevate? So it's a trickle down effect. So I think a lot of the only options that kids have nowadays are either, you go to a lower tiered school or you go and you go to a Mountain West or you have to go to a, Division II school to kind of start. I think it's, it's probably the best because a lot of kids, I've been coaching since, 2011, and, they would turn their nose up at a Mountain West offer, or they would think that, if it wasn't a power five at the time, power five's offer, it wasn't worth it. So I think it's kind of, put a lot of people in perspective and kind of say, hey, this is, the world of college football now. And I think it's best for the game because, I think kids now get an opportunity to kind of play right away. I think that's what everybody wants as a high school kid. They want to go somewhere that they feel like they can play right away. And I think being able to kind of go to some of these lower tier programs and get on the field within your first year or so, gives them a great opportunity to now they can at least get to where they want to be if they put the work in. And I think you're not going to find as many, you know, tragic tales of, oh, this guy was a 4-star and he just fizzled out once he got to whatever university and he just never worked out and then you just never hear from him again. I think now it's, gives a lot more kids opportunities to kind of, if that's not a good fit, go somewhere else and or hey, I have to start here and work my way up. I think either way it's a good thing for a lot of the kids because it gives them more opportunities now. At least
That's a
in their
really
head it does.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it that way. You told us earlier that of course, you're coaching on the weekends. You're busy as a parent too. I mean, you follow this team as closely as possible. You know what's going on. You may not be as locked in as you wish you were, but what have you seen from them so far? Obviously, you've seen what Dan Lanning has done. You've seen what they've done this year. What's your take on what they're looking like this year and kind of how far you think they can go?
Yeah, they've been playing, good team football is probably the best way to put it. Some days the defense is lights out. Some days, the offense has to step it up and carry it. And I think you're just kind of seeing just the overall, kind of plan of what Coach Lanning has kind of brought in since he's been here, and it's recruiting from the inside out, bringing in big physical athletic linemen on the offense and defensive side, being physical in the front seven, and then trying to get those freakish skill guys on the outside, and I think the best thing that I've seen so far from the team is the ability of with the quarterback play with Dante. He's been lights out, and I think this is I thought it was it was a sad point when I think we lost out the recruiting battle with him a couple years ago when he decided to go and play for UCLA. And from what I heard on the recruiting front, everybody thought he was going to be going to be that guy if he'd have came to Oregon fresh out of high school. So sadly, they had to take a detour for him. But I think because of that, I mean, we got Bo Nix for those 2 years. It might have been different had he committed. Maybe Bo doesn't come, maybe he does. You never know. But I think it was the best for his probably development to come in and then sit the year behind Gabriel, kind of learn. And I mean he's playing his butt off right now. He's carrying the offense and he's got a lot of talent around him, but I mean, he's got to be the one that stirs the drink, and he has been. All these weeks he's been clutch when he needs to be. He steps up, makes good runs, good throws, and he's been all that so far. So it's been good to see him kind of come in and kind of. I think everybody had a big question mark about the team, and it was the question mark was because of him. And I think for him to come out there and now he's being talked about as one of the best quarterbacks in the nation is amazing.
How special has it been as somebody who cares deeply about the program as an alum to see Coach Lanning's commitment to being in Eugene and speaking positively about staying at Oregon? Because there was with Taggart and Cristobal, there was a little dicey time there where people were kind of questioning, is Oregon a destination job? Is Oregon a place where people will stay and choose to win there? How special has that been just to see as somebody who obviously cares deeply about the program?
Yeah, I always cared about the program, and with those two, with Taggart and Cristobal, I really can't blame them, right? Having, if I was a head coach at New Mexico, and they were going to conference championships and we're on the verge of winning national championships, and Oregon would have called and said, hey, do you want to come and be our head coach? Being able, turning down your alma mater or turning down at a time, a team like Florida State it's hard to do. These guys are both, Southeast Florida kids. It's hard no matter what the job is that you currently have. It's hard to turn that down. So I totally I don't fault them at all for taking those jobs. And I think everybody who was kind of saying like, oh, this is crap, this job, this school isn't a stepping stone program. I always would tell people, it's like, well, I mean, it's okay if it is, because if you get somebody who comes in here and says, hey, I'm using this job to get the better job, you're going to get your best from him. Because he's not going to take this job and then come in and go 7-4, because he's not going to get that. He's not going to get that top tier job. If he doesn't view Oregon as a top tier job, he knows he's not going to get that top tier job. So I want somebody who's ambitious to come in here and to take this job and take it over and take it to new heights, because he has to, because he's ambitious. He wants the next bigger thing. So he has to perform well at this position, at this place. And I think both of those guys did. I think Taggart, even coming in at the 1 year, I think what he did was he kind of showed the administration, and I think the rest of the coaching staff, that we don't have to just recruit regionally. We can go out and get kids from Texas and Florida and the southeast part of the country. And then Cristobal kind of came in, who Cristobal was on that staff, right? And he steps in and then takes it to another level, and takes us to the place where now get a guy like Coach Lanning, who comes in and he's doing it at warp speed now, being able to kind of do all of those same things. And with all the guys who are saying like, oh, we were looking hard and they really wanted them to hire, Justin Wilcox and other guys to come in who had, bigger ties to Oregon. And, my whole thing was like, I just want the best guy for the job. I want the guy who's going to come in and continue to recruit his butt off, continue to do what Taggart and Cristobal did, and continue to bring in the best athletes. And I love Justin. I played with Justin my freshman year. We were on the same team together in '99. I've gone up and visited Cal at him and Sermon up there and talked to those guys, and it was they do a great job at Cal. But if I think for what Oregon was trying to accomplish, I just don't think that would have been a perfect fit. I think it would have been the Scott Frost in Nebraska all over again. Justin would have came in, the fan base, the administration would have had national champion, Pac-12 national championship expectations, and if he didn't live up to that, I think it would have been hard on him, and it would have been hard on the administration to kind of have to pull the plug if they had to. So I think being able to come in and bring Lanning in to where he was hot off of the national championship with Georgia, he was being talked about as one of the top D coordinators in the nation, and he's a great recruiter. And I think that's where you already kind of set the path to where this is where we're going. We're going for these high end recruits, doesn't matter where they are. Here's a guy who's been in the Southeast for the last few years. Let's keep it going. And I mean, I'm glad it's worked out, because I think, like I said, this is the perfect place for him. And I'm kind of glad to hear that this is where he wants to be, because all I want is what's best for the program. So happy to see where it is.
Totally. Let's close out with some quick hitters. These are some of our fans' favorite questions. We're gonna run through real quickly. You were part of the group that started the new uniform craze. You guys didn't wear the new uniforms every week like they do this week or this year or the past several years. So I'll ask you this. We usually ask what your favorite uniform was that you ever wore, but for you, what was the uniform that you wished you most got to wear?
Man, the uniform I always wished I wanted to wear was the Rose Bowl uniform, the '94. So I came in '99 where they just went away from wearing the green on the yellow, and my whole 4 years at Oregon, I kept talking to the head equipment man, Pat, at the time, and I was like, "Hey, let's go throwback one time. Let's pick this. Let's do a throwback game. Bust out the old uniforms," And he always would shoot me down. He'd always, just kind of go, and I was like, all right. So every year I'd come in and say, hey, can we at least take the stripes off the jersey so we can mix and match, so we can go green on white or white on green? And yeah, I got shut down all the time. So it really frustrated me when the year after I left is when they brought in the green, yellow, the white, the black, all the different uniforms in '03. But yeah, I always wanted to wear the old school, the Kelly green and yellow from the Rose Bowl year. That was always what I wanted to wear.
Ahead of your time, big time.
Yep.
All right. What was the most hyped locker room you can ever remember post game?
Post game hyped locker room. I think it had to be Arizona State 2000. Just coming back from, what were we down like 20 something points in the second half, and that was probably the most hyped I've seen the locker room because we were all exhausted. The flight from the night before took like 10 hours, but to go in there, pull that game off in double overtime. I mean, everybody was just, and then the flight home was even just as good too, and it was great. That was probably the most hyped locker room I've been in.
Who's the best player that you've ever played against?
Best player I've ever played against in college, I would
Yeah, it's
say
like college.
not on my team. I would say it was probably just to age myself. It was probably either Delta O'Neal or Namdi Asamoah. So me and Namdi were the same year. We played in the both high school and college all-star games together. But he was phenomenal. And then Delta O'Neal, funny enough, they both went to Cal, but they're just Delta was a extremely just great athlete. I mean, I think he led as a cornerback. He led Cal in scoring in '99. So he was an amazing athlete. Yeah, so he was probably the best I've gone against. Not from the school.
What is the loudest stadium you ever played in beyond Autzen?
Uh, I mean, unfortunately for me, I haven't played in that many stadiums, and I'll just always say it was probably Wisconsin, 2000, and it was partly because you walk in there having this was pre vast internet, pre social media, and having no idea about jump around, and you're sitting there, we're I think we're down at the time by 7 or 14, and we're trying to make this comeback, so we're just in the huddle getting ready to go, and you hear the first opening notes of Jump Around, and the crowd just loses it, and you're just sitting there like, what is going on? And then the rest of the song comes on, and you look up, and the whole crowd of red is just jumping up and down. Yeah, that was probably the loudest opposing stadium I've ever played in. Some of the other stadiums I played in didn't get that loud, mostly because we were beating them like SC or UCLA, so they never really got that loud.
So what was your reaction last year when that video came out that Dan, told his whole team to, participate in the jump around, take their energy and help use it to, win that game? What was your thoughts when you saw
Yeah,
that?
it's to the point where it's like you don't want anything to surprise you. You don't want anything to catch you off guard. You don't want anything to take your focus away, right? So going into it knowing like, hey, this is what they do every fourth quarter. Like this is what this is what we have to expect. It's preparing your team, preparing your guys, and having them be prepared for what's coming. You can't go into any situation and not have your guys ready to go and have something catch you off guard, and then all of a sudden you just get kind of caught up in the moment. Because I got caught up in the moment. Like right, I was like, oh man, this is awesome, this is cool. Like it didn't like overtake me. It didn't shake me up or anything. But you could tell like opposing teams like from non-Big Ten schools who have never experienced that before, you can see how that can kind of rattle somebody and kind of get them out of their game. So yeah, you got to go into it and just kind of know what to expect and then just grab the bull by the horns and say, yeah, we're gonna make this ours.
I love it. All right, is there just two more here? Is there a coach or a teammate who had a lasting impact on your life beyond football?
Oh yeah, I would say I had two, man. Chris Peterson first and foremost, just because he's my position coach and was just from day one. We just had a great relationship, and I've seen him a few times since. It's just every time we see each other, it's just just like yesterday. And then definitely Jimmy Radcliffe, man. He was probably the best you know coach in school history, right? He was there the longest out of everybody. He was there from the Rich Brooks days to Bellotti to Chip, to Helfrich, and he was kind of the backbone of the program, and he just gave it to you straight, right? It was no fluff. It is what it was, and he didn't take any mess. All 5'6", 135 pounds of him, and it was he was an awesome coach, and to be kind of coached by him as a returner, so to return kicks and stuff like that. So to be with him every single day for 4 years, before practice, after practice, in the weight room, it was an amazing relationship, and I'll always take that with me. He's always my best coach.
I love that. All right, last one here. Which game or play still plays in your head like it was yesterday?
I know everybody probably say, "Oh, the punt return, the punt return." It's which is it was always that was always awesome. But I think the one play that always kind of there's been a couple. I mean, my first touchdown against Washington, my freshman year, that always plays into it. And then secondly, I'd always kind of say I'd say the punt return against Oregon State, but it was probably the punt return after was the bigger one, the lasting impression, only because you return it the first time, you score, and you come out there again, and the whole crowd, at least where I was standing from that sideline, the crowd was just chanting my name and just going, Keenan, Keenan. So it just like leaves a lasting, you know, impact on you, because like, I think those are some things that as probably a little kid or somebody who is playing football in the backyard, or trying to, if there's things where it's like, oh, you want to make the game when they play in the Super Bowl, and it's always some form of like the crowds chant your name, just pumping you up. And yeah, I always remember that, because I was just like in the midst of everything that was going on. It was just like you kind of sit there for a second, because usually I don't pay attention to that stuff at all. I'm just like so locked in and zoned out. But then I run out there and they're doing that, and it was just kind of like, oh man, this is kind of cool. This is kind of big time. So it was pretty awesome.
Well, I was an 11-year-old at that game, so I might have been one of those guys again. I'm not sure. Well, hey man, we're so grateful to you, Keenan, for coming on. It sounds like you're going to be in Eugene this weekend for the big game.
Yeah, I mean, because of coaching, I haven't been able to come up since 2014, the Mariota year, when they put the 2001 team into the Hall of Fame. And just my bye week and Oregon home games never kind of aligned. And this year I saw, like, back in like January, February, I was like, oh, they have a home game, and we have the week off. So I've just kind of made my plans since then to kind of come up this week. And after Indiana having a game, I mean, the year that they did last year, I kind of knew, like, man, if Indiana's undefeated at this point and we beat Penn State, this could be a big game. So I needed to kind of get on top of getting tickets and getting everything together beforehand. And luckily have it, like, Indiana's undefeated, we beat Penn State, and lucky for me and my family, I already got all our tickets and everything taken care of in our flights, so we're good to go.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you having you on. Super cool to hear from you and all the storytelling. Maybe we'll run into each other in Eugene, but just appreciate you joining us today, and thank all the fans for listening. And we'll catch you next week on the Ducks Rising podcast.
All right, man. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Anytime.